It's The World This Week, 7 days, 4 Paris-based correspondents, 1 hour. The World This Week in partnership with The Daily Beast. Should we be starting a campaign to have Christopher Dickey, foreign editor, released from his sequestering at his New York headquarters? How are you, Christopher?
I'm fine, but I'm on my way back to Paris. I'll be on the set next week.
Oh, you're missing the strikes, Christopher. But anyway, with us, who has enjoyed...
I'm sorry I'm missing the strikes, but, you know, what can you do?
Well, fortunately, Rosie Collier, staff reporter at Radio France International, has enjoyed them in full. She'll be able to brief you later on that. Also joining us, Hamdan Mostafavi, editor-in-chief of Courrier International, which brings us here in this country the best of the world's press. What's on your cover this week?
This week on our cover, we are treating Germany and the fact that the far right is coming back to power in some parts.
Judah Grunstein joins us as well, editor-in-chief of World Politics Review. Where does one find World Politics Review?
At worldpoliticsreview.com.
All right. Many thanks for being with us. The World This Week on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag World This Week. In the United States, nearly 5 months to go before the first primaries and caucuses for the U.S. elections. That seems an awful long time for those dying to know who among the Democrats on stage for the third candidates debate Thursday will get the right to challenge Donald Trump.
Know that the senator says she's for Bernie. Well, I'm for Barack. I think the Obamacare worked.
We're going to do this by saying everyone is covered by Medicare for all. Every health care provider is covered. And the only question here in terms of difference is where to send the bill.
Christopher Dickey, is the picture getting any clearer?
Not really. I mean, at the moment, the top three contenders are Bernie Sanders and Biden and Elizabeth Warren. And you just saw Biden and Warren there. But nobody has a great deal of enthusiasm about any of them. There are a lot of more middle-of-the-road contenders like Pete Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar that I think would have a broader general appeal, but they haven't been able to break through in the polls in the Democratic Party. So the general feeling about the debates last night is that they didn't really change anything very much for any of the 10 candidates who were on stage, and they were mildly but not tremendously entertaining.
Mildly but not tremendously. How much attention are Americans paying to this?
I don't think they're really paying that much attention yet. I think that that's one of the critical problems. It's why we don't really know who's going to emerge on top this far ahead of the game. People sort of think, yeah, there's the debate tonight, and maybe I'll watch if I'm a total political junkie. But most people are going to wait for the news programs in the morning, or just to what they hear about the debate afterwards, or watch pieces of it on YouTube, or forget it altogether, because the field is still too big. Once we get down to 3 or 4 really top contenders, and we really are seeing divisions among them, then it'll be a better horse race and people will pay more attention. But as you say, we are still a long way even from the first caucuses and primary votes.
A long way away, Judah Grunstein, yet I'm sure as an American in Paris, every time you go to a dinner party or you meet someone in a cafe, the first question they ask you is, so who's going to face Trump?
Who's going to face Trump? I think in terms of watching the debates, these are the debates in the social media era. So as Christopher said, people don't actually watch the debates. They watch the highlights and the clips and the 3-minute clip that has the 10 best barbs or replies. I think that it's not clear who will face Trump, but I think there's one trend that's very clear that's coming out of it in terms of Democratic voters and the candidates themselves. It's this sense of whether you go safe or whether you go big. Safe candidate would be a centrist, someone like Biden, who's a very establishment candidate, someone who who has a proven track record in terms of being looked on as a known figure. Going big would be someone like Elizabeth Warren, who's promising much more activism in terms of a Democratic platform. Bernie Sanders, who obviously has his whole past. And I think that what you do see a lot of in terms of the Democratic voters is a real inhibition, this fear, this idea that this is such a big election that the Democrats just can't afford to lose to Trump, and they don't know which one will generate more mobilization among voters? Do you really rouse the base with someone like Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren, or do you reassure the centrist swing voters who often decide an election with someone like Klobuchar or Biden? And it's I think, as Chris said, it's something that I think once you have the real champions of each wing of the party on stage, and some of the clutter is cleared up, it'll become a little clearer.
It'll become clear. And then there's the other fear, which is, will whoever's facing him be able to grab the spotlight? Donald Trump having his usual tumultuous week at the office, you know, another firing by Twitter, this time his national security advisor, the veteran hawk of Beltway politics, John Bolton, dismissed after airing his objections over that aborted Camp David summit with the Taliban. Bolton almost immediately, by the way, shooting back with a "you can't fire me because I quit" kind of tweet. Sitting pretty through it all, Bolton's rival for Trump's ear, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo.
I don't talk about the inner workings of how this all goes. We all give our candid opinions. There were many times Ambassador Bolton and I disagree. That's to be sure. But that's true for lots of people with whom I interact. My mission set is always to make sure, as I run the Department of State, is to deliver America's diplomacy and to work with the team, whether it's a Treasury or the President's staff, to make sure we get good outcomes. I know everyone's talked about this for an awfully long time. There were definitely places that Ambassador Bolton and I had different views about how we should proceed.
Rosie Clear, when you see the thinly veiled backstabbing taking place inside of the White House, it's going to be hard for the Democrats to rival that when it comes to the attention, getting the attention of voters and viewers.
For sure. And I think that Pompeo's in an even stronger position now there in the White House, because ultimately he's one of the longest lasting. I mean, he's got real staying power. And there are rumours within the White House, of course, is that he didn't get along with Bolton at all. And if whoever is going to be the next national security advisor, they have to sort of get through Pompeo to get to Trump. So I think that there's really interesting dynamics at the moment. And that obviously begs the question, who is likely to replace Bolton?
With Bolton gone, well, does that signal a change?
For now, let's see who is named, if it'll be sort of somebody already in an advisor role, perhaps the advisor for North Korea or the advisor for Iran, issues on Iran, because ultimately they've been the two sticking points for Bolton, why he didn't get on initially with towards the end rather with the president, with President Trump, for those two areas of foreign policy, particularly, as I say, Iran and North Korea. So it'll be interesting if Trump selects either a person with one of those two portfolios.
It'll be interesting indeed, and we recall that disagreement that Bolton and Trump had when it came to that aborted airstrike off the coast of Iran that Trump stopped at the last minute. Now, last month, when Emmanuel Macron announced at the G7 summit that he hosted in Biarritz, that he hoped to broker a breakthrough with Iran, there were plenty of reasons to be skeptical. And we're now a little over a week away from UN Week in New York, and there's still skepticism. Nonetheless, with Bolton gone, Hamdan Mustafavi, are we closer to a first handshake between U.S. and Iranian leaders since before the 1979 revolution?
I think, yes, we are, definitely, because I don't see any other reason for Trump firing Bolton right now, except Afghanistan. But of course, it's about getting a nice pictures with rogue leaders and saying he can make peace and dialogue where others couldn't. So I think he will seize this occasion to negotiate on his own terms.
And we heard a bit of brinkmanship from both sides after the announcement, the Iranians saying, all right, yeah, he was a warmonger, but towing a tough line. What will it take for that handshake to happen?
Because on the Iranian side, it was not well perceived from everyone that there should be a meeting between Rouhani, the president, and Trump, because, there are the hardliners in Iran too who think that it's better not to mingle with America, great Satan.
And yet you think there is a chance that meeting might happen?
I think with Bolton gone, it's also something some people in Iran can, they can sell the fact that the hawk is gone, so now we can negotiate. And anyway, they have to, because It's not like Iran is in a good situation. They can't sell any oil. They have a food shortage. They have such an economic situation that forces them to do something, even if it's handshake with the devil.
Do you agree, Christopher Dickey, that Macron magic might actually work, and we could see him brokering that handshake?
Well, I think that he may facilitate a mechanism that allows Trump to essentially make waves that will allow something like, they're talking about $15 billion to start moving into Iran, which would certainly help Iran's economy in the short term and open the way for some kind of meeting. The irony in all this is that what we're hearing is that Trump essentially wants Iran to go back to observing the letter of the agreement, the letter of the law, as it were, in the agreement on its nuclear development, its nuclear program. Basically go back to the JCPOA, the Obama agreement. And it's typical Trump that we would have all this trouble, all this pain, and the negotiated agreement in the end would look very much like the one he threw in the trash can before. So I think that it's very possible that we will see that development over the next few weeks and months.
And Bolton gone, how much does it change foreign policy in this White House?
Well, I think it does change the policy in the sense, in a curious way. As we've said on the show before, Trump really is not a warmonger in the conventional sense. He doesn't want troops deployed. He knows that his base doesn't like that. Americans don't like it anymore. They're tired of what they call the forever wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And that's why he's trying to end them. He definitely doesn't want to start any new ones. But he does believe in the power of the dollar. He believes that you can squeeze countries using the enormous economic power of the United States and its ability to influence banking and trade all over the world. And you can squeeze China, you can squeeze Iran, you can squeeze North Korea, and eventually you can make them come around to your point of view. The truth is he hasn't succeeded with that, but he believes over the long term it will work. And part of his game is to cozy up to the adversaries in that process, whether it's Xi Jinping or Kim Jong-un or now perhaps Hassan Rouhani.
Judah Grunstein?
Yeah, I think that from the beginning, there were always very obvious differences between Bolton and Trump. They had some similarities in terms of temperament, being iconoclastic, being willing to overturn the apple cart and be the only one in the room who espouses a pretty marginal idea. At the same time, they also shared this idea that America can get what it wants anytime, every time. And that if, as long as it bangs its hand on the table, and that if America didn't get what it wants, it means because someone didn't bang hard enough. I think where they really parted ways is, as Chris said, that Bolton was really okay with war. He was okay with simultaneous wars, probably in North Korea and Iran, whereas Trump really didn't want to go that far. I think the other thing where they diverge is their objectives. I think for all the criticisms you can make about John Bolton, he had a coherent worldview that had something to do with America, what he perceived to be America's interests. Trump's objectives are his own political advantage, period. He started the reality TV show with the Tough Guy Act, and he's getting ready for the season finale before the election, where he gets to shake hands and sign deals that, as Christopher said, resolve problems that he created. That's the story arc that he wants, and he's willing to accept bad deals to get it. For the time being, if there was one reassuring thing about Bolton being looking over his shoulder, is that he would prevent Trump from giving away the store in negotiations with North Korea, for instance, less with China, but certainly with Iran. Right now, if we get a deal close to the Iran nuclear deal with Iran, but get back to that would be an ideal outcome. The danger is that Trump gives away more with someone like Bolton not looking over his shoulder.
One constant of Donald Trump's presidency, though, has been to side with the hawks in Israel. And there's a general election there coming up next week. He even put it, his own son-in-law is supposed to be the one who presents this Middle East peace plan. If he does have a thaw in relations with Iran, does that undermine Benjamin Netanyahu?
Yeah, I was about to say we have to watch what's going on in the New York, but we have to watch what's going on Israel on the same day, because if it's not going to be easy to have this discussion with Netanyahu if he plans to shake hands with Rouhani. So he has to give at least something to his Israeli allies. And let's not forget that there are also the Saudis in this nice equation of oaks and friends and foes. So it's a bit more. I think it's more about marketing and cosmetics than the real deal.
I think that Netanyahu is going to learn if there is some sort of meeting with Rouhani, and if Trump really does want to deal with Iran. I think Netanyahu is going to learn the real danger of what he's done with Israel's ties with the U.S. He's banked them entirely with the Republican Party and with one leader. And that leader happens to be Trump, who's entirely unpredictable and who operates only according to what is to his political advantage. I don't think Trump would hesitate 1 second to throw Netanyahu under the bus, to throw the Saudis under the bus for that matter. He has a whole list of grievances he can pull out and shake in their faces if they contest it at all. And I think that if Trump wants to deal with Iran, it's not Netanyahu that's going to get in the way. Yeah, and he's burned so many bridges with the Democratic Party at this point that he won't be able to come to Washington and get joint houses of Congress, a speech in front of Congress and the Senate, the way he did to try to scuttle Obama's deal with Iran.
But the calendar plays in Netanyahu's favor, since the election is next Tuesday and UN week starts the 21st.
Yeah, sure. But anyway, whatever happens, Netanyahu has his own problems at home. So let's see what happens to him first. But anyway, even if there is a deal between Iran and the US, I don't think Israel will just stay quiet. They will have something to say.
All right, when we come back, we're going to take a look at how Donald Trump's America First sounds to Europeans as they just announced their new commissioners for the next 5 years. Stay with us. You're watching The World This Week.
In 2013, Edward Snowden's explosive revelations made him the most wanted man in the world.
Honestly, I was terrified. I was so scared.
He was helped in his Hong Kong hideout by a group of asylum seekers at great risk to themselves.
Every single minute we are in danger.
They know how life in Hong Kong or my country.
Si les anges gardiens de Snowden se font déporter, ils retournent en enfer.
Don't miss our exclusive report about the people who put themselves on the line to defend the values of freedom.
Please protect these families.
Reporters, presented by Mark Owen on France 24 and France24.com.
The world is ever changing. The news doesn't wait. That's why at France 24, we'll always be there to help make sense of world events. For the best international coverage, 24 hours a day, no matter what, France 24 is with you everywhere, all the time.
Liberté, égalité, actualité.
Bond. James Bond. James Bond. Hello, I'm Pierce Brosnan. You're watching France 24 from the Deauville Film Festival.
This week on Encore, I speak to former 007 actor Pierce Brosnan, one of this year's guests of honour at the Deauville Film Festival. Join us as we look back at his 40-year career.
Encore, presented by Eve Jackson on France 24 and France24.com.
In 2011, the biggest tsunami in Japan's history hit the city of Kamaishi. 3,000 houses were destroyed and over 1,000 inhabitants were swept away and drowned. Always popular, rugby is now breathing new life into the community.
I think we helped this city regain its sense of purpose.
Optimism and solidarity are the other key ingredients to recovery.
Kamaishi's entire population was united, just like a rugby team.
Sport brings us together. It makes us stronger.
In the run-up to the Rugby World Cup, join us on a trip to Japan for this episode of Revisited on France 24 and France24.com.
Welcome back. Before we resume the World This Week, it's time to tell you about some of the stories we're following for you in the newsroom. Friday the 13th, marking the biggest one-day strike in the Paris area for transit in years. Metro and suburban rail workers launching the first of several protests that are planned against reforms to the public service pension system. Robert Mugabe's family agrees finally for Zimbabwe's independence leader to be buried at the Heroes Acre Shrine. However, they say it'll be a private ceremony in a month's time. Mourners filed past Mugabe's casket for a second day ahead of a national tribute on Saturday. Turkey's former Prime Minister Ahmet Davutoglu quits the ruling AK party. Once Recep Tayyip Erdogan's right-hand man, Davutoglu vows to found his own movement. Opening night for one of Paris's most storied auditoriums for 2 years, the Théâtre du Châtelet has been shut for renovation. On the program, Eric Satie's ballet Parade. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's The World This Week. The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast foreign editor Christopher Dickey joins us from headquarters in New York. Welcome back as well to Rosie Collier, staff reporter at sister station Radio France International. Hamdan Mostafavi, editor-in-chief of the weekly Courrier International, which brings the French the best of the world's press. And Judah Grunstein, editor-in-chief of World Politics Review. We were talking about Donald Trump's America First policy when it comes to international relations. When Trump says America First, Europe hears him loud and clear. The president-elect of the European Commission this week unveiling her lineup of 26 commissioners. Not only is the biggest thorn in the U.S. president's side back in Ursula von der Leyen's team, but now Denmark's Margrethe Vestager has a beefed-up portfolio. She keeps competition, but she's now officially executive vice president for digital policy. Christopher Dickey, I know that in the U.S. there are moves afoot now to rein in the power of the digital tech giants like Google and Apple, but clearly this move is aimed squarely at Washington.
Well, it is aimed at Washington, but you're right. There is a movement here in the United States. I think almost all 50 states are bringing cases against these huge digital monopolies. And so there's going to be a lot of pressure. And I wouldn't be surprised if there's at least tacit cooperation between or sort of watching each other in action between the American initiatives and the European ones. And of course, the Europeans have taken the lead over time.
Some are saying, Hamdan Mostafavi, that it's not great putting digital affairs in together with competition. The competition should be separate for ethical reasons from the rest.
Well, that's not a bad point, actually, but it's about Margaret Vestager, who has been such a leader in those fields that I think you can't take any of it from her.
And she's been openly criticized by Trump.
Yes, of course, because she's taking a view that's very different from him.
It's another familiar face, though, that's causing the biggest stir. Greece's Margaritis Chinas will now be in charge of migration policy. Only that's not his job description. He's to be vice president for protecting our European way of life. The new president of the European Parliament wants an explanation. So does Ursula von der Leyen's predecessor.
The European way of life is putting together our main talents and energies. And included in that room is the fact that you have to respect the others, independently from their color and independently from their initial home state. Knowing Margaritis well, because I was in daily contact with him, I know that the title is not corresponding to his own values. And I think that this will have to be changed.
Rosie Collier, what was your reaction to this job description?
On the face of it, quite shocking as someone who's grown up in Europe to parents of coming from outside of the European Union and Africa. But and I think it's especially a difficult one because she's aligning basically migration with security, and I think that's the difficulty, suggesting that migration potentially is a security threat for Europe, and I think that's what makes this contentious. So contentious actually that Margaritis himself hasn't actually put that job title on his Twitter description as yet. And I think it's going to be discussed, isn't it? It's going to be discussed next week. I think Ursula will have to.
She's tried to do a little bit of damage control. Judah Grunstein putting out a clarification on Thursday over Twitter. She tweeted our European way of life with a big graph that showed all these words with values in them. But yeah, it doesn't say much about migration and security in that tweet.
It's really it's disappointing because at a time when especially the recent European Parliament elections were framed as this big battle between a liberal vision and a pluralistic vision of Europe versus a far right authoritarian and nationalist sense of Europe, to see this, which is very clearly this far-right discourse being mainstreamed and being not only mainstreamed but endorsed by the European Union. It's absolutely outrageous. Apparently, when it was announced in the press room, the press asked, "What does this mean?" And when it was explained that it had to do with migration, there was like vocal reaction of disapproval. Eventually, they'll either walk it back or they'll take the consequences. My reaction to the Commission in general is that, as is typical with the EU, it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, or 1 forward and 2 steps back, depending on how you look at it. It's a very ambitious commission.
They say it's the most political ever.
It's just very clearly signaling that the EU has gotten the message that things have changed. It's not all soft power in the world anymore. You can't just convince people to do what you want by offering sweetened business deals. So there's a little more of a geostrategic approach. You have strong countries in charge of very strong portfolios. Spain as the foreign minister, the equivalent of the foreign minister. The French candidate is in charge of security and defense. That's a strong signal. The fact that Vestager was promoted and her regulatory powers increased, that's another signal. The step back is this stuff about protecting our European way of life, but then you also have this weird overlapping of some of the portfolios where it's not exactly clear who takes care of what and who is responsible and where the dividing line is. And with the EU, that's always a recipe for ego battles, for national battles between countries with different perspectives on the particular issues. So I think a big question mark is how strong is von der Leyen in terms of managing traffic and wrapping people on the knuckles to get them back in their lanes when that needs to be done. And if not, what kind of damage control she can do.
All right, the most oft-used quip about the incoming commission is that von der Leyen has proven Germans do have a sense of humor. She's appointed Ireland's Phil Hogan as trade commissioner. Trade commissioner, the one who'll have to negotiate with his rowdy neighbors. Yes, that was the moment when, on Monday, the House of Commons usher, a.k.a. Black Rod, entered the chamber to bear the news of Parliament's longest prorogation since 1945, 5 weeks. What did you make of those scenes, Rosie Collier?
Sad day for British democracy, for sure. And it seems all indications that Boris Johnson's going to get his way and will take Britain out of the EU on the 31st of October. And most likely at this point, given that Parliament won't be back until the 14th of October, that he'll take Britain out of the EU without a deal.
And all of Europe's paying attention, and we're paying more attention to the customs and mores of this constitutional standoff. We're discovering when it gets really solemn in the House of Lords, the British revert to the language of William the Conqueror.
La reine le vote.
Yes, as there's a series of policies read out, La Reine le veult, V-E-U-L-T, which means the Queen wants it in Old French.
Language, I imagine. Yeah.
How do Nigerian anthropologists decipher all of this?
Yeah. Really, no, really, it's as I say, a very sad day. And but will the big question that remains is, will Boris Johnson respect this law for him that he has to delay Brexit? I'm not sure that he will.
It's a sad day for British democracy, perhaps, but it's a really happy day for the rest of the world. I wish they could have done this years ago. Just suspended Parliament, save us all of this pain and suffering and this entire drama. I honestly, if they could suspend the government, Boris Johnson, and the rest of it as well, it'd be great. More seriously, I think from some reporting I've seen that there's actually some move afoot to make some tweaks in the withdrawal agreement that Theresa May negotiated to move the backstop, actually to put Northern Ireland entirely in the customs union and move the backstop between Northern Ireland and the UK, which might be a compromise solution that I think Boris Johnson would be willing to accept.
Chris Radicki, we poke fun at the funny wigs and the usher called Black Rod. But it is a reminder, this is the world's oldest parliamentary democracy, and boy, this is a test.
Well, it is a test, and it's really a humiliation for Great Britain and for the democratic process. I mean, I think the democratic process is under threat in lots of places, in many European countries, really conspicuously now in Great Britain, and also here in the United States. For a long time, we were all complacent about this. And now when we watch the oldest parliamentary democracy essentially tearing itself apart as a result of a referendum which was based on very dubious propositions, and now the rule of a party that's ruling from a real, in terms of votes and popular support, small minority position, is that what we call democracy, whether a Republican democracy or any other kind of democracy? No, it's not. It's a kind of demagoguery that really is shameful and really is worrying, in fact, potentially hugely damaging to everything we thought about our values in Europe and in the United States.
What kind of feedback, Hamda Mostafavi, are you getting from readers of Courrier International on this?
They're a bit surprised, and I think that everyone's a bit bored about Brexit right now.
They're bored of it? They're bored of it? Really?
Yeah, because, it's like, what's going on? Every day it changes. But the thing is, maybe the arrival of Johnson has, put a new spice in it, even if it's a bit frightening. So I think there is strong ties between Europe and the UK. So that's really what worries everybody here, that those ties should be severed in any way. And I think now, getting closer to reality, Johnson has gone too far. I think he knows it by alienating some of his so many people of his own party, of his own side. So I think he has now to accept some compromise. He will do it, I think, on Ireland, just to be able to have some deal, even if it's not the best deal. I think he won't care about the point. He's a bit like Trump, so it's more about getting a deal.
You agree they're going to step back from the brink?
It's possible, and I think what's interesting just today actually is DUP, so that's the party in Northern Ireland that is part of
that supports his.
Yeah, that supports. He's actually also making more positive sounds about the possibility of border checks in the Irish Sea. So that's something that also could perhaps prevent the ultimate backstop that the Leavers absolutely will not compromise on. So I think that what DUP have been saying today, it's interesting and taking a slightly softer line on possible solutions to the backstop, preventing backstop.
Of course, now comes party conference time, so we'll see how much brinkmanship there is. The latest wave of anti-immigrant violence in South Africa seemed to subside this week after leaving at least 12 dead recently, but not if you believe those who still insisted on boarding the first of several flights home to Nigeria for foreign workers and their spouses.
What I saw in South Africa, it was terrible. For the past 4 days, I couldn't sleep. I couldn't do anything because of the fear. Because of the fear of being killed.
The apartheid in South Africa, the policy is still continuing in South Africa. That is the policy of segregation. This time is not about segregation from the black, from white, from black. It's about the oppressions of other Africans.
It's still apartheid South Africa, Rosie Collier?
I think that's a little bit extreme. I was posted there for 6 months in 2009, so just before that euphoric World Cup held there. And for sure there are tensions, and okay, that was 10 years ago. There were definitely tensions between black South Africans and black Africans there in South Africa. But I think essentially what's happened over the past couple of years is that within the ANC, at lower levels of the ANC, so sort of ward levels, I think you've got some politicians who are stirring that anti-immigrant sentiment because of that party's failings, basically. So I think that's ultimately what's going on. There's some very sort of dark political undercurrents that are alienating black Africans against the black population black South African population who hasn't been well served by.
So what can Cyril Ramaphosa, the president, do?
I think that he needs to reach out definitely to the Africans and the many hundreds of thousands of Africans who remain in South Africa. I think that he hasn't done enough of that yet. I think it's been left to sort of diplomacy, the diplomatic level. So you've had envoys called in Abuja, and then you've had an envoy sent to South Africa. So there's things sort of shifting on the diplomatic level, but I think really on the political grassroots party political level, I think that Ramaphosa needs to do a lot more to reach out to the everyday African immigrant there.
This Friday saw, by the way, Judah Grunstein, a rally outside the Johannesburg Stock Exchange against gender violence in South Africa. Women are the target of rape and murder often. It's a violent place. And again, this is the Rainbow Nation we're talking about.
Well, I think in some ways South Africa both benefited and suffered from the national image that emerged after the transition from apartheid. It benefited in the sense that it had a huge capital of soft power. It was really a model for a peaceful transition from dictatorship, essentially. And at the same time, it suffers because that creates this expectation that it's a country that somehow has transcended the human condition. And it hasn't. The ANC, there's a lot of blame that goes around. The ANC is horribly corrupt. At the top, there are people who really capitalized on the transition to basically appropriate wealth that was then continued to be concentrated in the upper echelons of the party, entire networks of patronage and corrupt patronage. And that's lasted now for several decades. And at the bottom of the social hierarchy, you have people who haven't seen a huge change in terms of their economic conditions, at the very least. Certainly, it's no longer an apartheid system. But if people still don't have the benefits of any redistribution of the nation's wealth 20 years later, obviously there's going to be this kind of animosity. And then, as Rosie said, there are politicians who are using it and exploiting it to stoke that kind of mobilization to avoid accountability for the ANC.
All right, we've been talking about the blowback against racism in football for a while. Since the start of the season here in France, referees have interrupted several matches because of homophobic chants from the crowd, the kind, well, you used to hear every weekend. The implementation of a Europe-wide directive hailed by anti-discrimination activists. So imagine the storm when the president of the French Football Federation spoke on breakfast radio Tuesday.
There's a staunch desire to make sure that everyone in the stands can be in a dignified, friendly, even familial environment. But I'm not interested in stopping matches.
You're telling referees to no longer stop matches?
Yes, it's a mistake. I would stop games for racist chants.
Yeah, the sports minister, Roxana Maricianu, it's a former Olympic swimmer, by the way, she hit back quickly, saying Le Gret had been wrong in differentiating between homophobia and racism. And what's surprising, Christopher Dickey, is that till recently, you know, there's this tribal feeling when you're in the stands at a sports event. It's not something people thought about when they chanted this stuff.
No, but there is a long and ugly tradition in soccer, football, in Europe. The hooliganism, the tribalism sliding into hooliganism. We've seen an enormous number of racist incidents where black players on the field are treated like monkeys, as if they were monkeys.
But Christopher, but it's not just soccer.
Now they slide
Christopher,
over into
Christopher,
homophobia.
it's not just soccer, because I mean, I've been to sporting events in North America where you don't hear racist chants, but you often heard chants accusing the other side of being homosexuals.
Well, there's two things here. One is the kind of old style, and I don't think you hear that much anymore, but if you do, I think people will have problems as a result. There was the old kind of gay baiting idea that if you were homosexual, you were ipso facto weak, effeminate, all the things that we know are not actually true in many, many cases. And, you know, all of a sudden, now we have a situation where that's not acceptable, but it shouldn't be acceptable. It shouldn't be acceptable in the United States, and it shouldn't be acceptable here in Europe. And frankly, if I were in the stands and heard people shouting like that, I'd leave the stands.
Rosie Clear?
I think the mistake he made was sort of distinguishing between the two different types of discrimination, whereby he said it's okay to stop a match if if they're chanting, vulgar slogans at black players, but it's fine, and for the match to continue if slogans are being shouted or or homophobic slogans are being shouted. But I think ultimately the difference is that you wouldn't know if somebody's gay. Obviously, you can see if somebody's black, but you wouldn't know if somebody's gay. And up until this day, as far as I'm aware, nobody in the French Football League, only one in the English Football League, has ever come out to say that they're gay. And ultimately, you can understand why they wouldn't want to come out if this is allowed to continue, right?
While they're not.
I was going to say it's a failure of the French Federation not only to protect the spectators in the stands, but also, as you just said, to protect their own players. Oftentimes, athletes wait until they've retired to come out because of that. And as Christopher said, it's this idea that somehow it's an insult to say someone's gay. Oftentimes, it was the best player on the other team who actually was gay. When the fans were trying to insult the team for being gay, and it's actually someone who is gay who's actually winning the game for the opposing team. And so I think that as long as people don't feel safe and they feel that they do have to hide, then you can have the perpetuation of these kind of destructive myths and illusions. And I think that the French Federation really needs to support its players to be able to be open about it so that those myths are left in the past.
We're going to have to leave it there. I want to thank you, Judah Grunstein. I want to thank you as well, Rosie Clear, Hamdan Mustafavi, Christopher Dickey for joining us from New York. Stay with us. Media Watch is next.